I am Fred Weems. This is my essay, Paperboy. When I was in 7th grade, the first year of junior high, I joined the school newspaper, the Tornado News. This was the school year from September 1972 to June of 73. I seem to remember I had to have some sort of special dispensation to be on it because you had to be in 8th grade. I could be wrong about that. It's neither here nor there. But I bring that up to show that I think about this sort of thing a lot. I also seem to remember that in my freshman year of college, I took a test to get out of the expository writing requirement because by the rules, you couldn't take creative writing unless you'd passed expository writing. In any case, we had a really kind faculty advisor, Mr. O'Sullivan. He taught social studies. It was in his class that I got the only civics instruction of my entire education. I will wager he was a Union man. In any case, he was alarmed to see that the staff at the Tornado News, made up mostly of 8th and 9th graders, were at each other's throats over politics. He resolved the situation by getting the school to allow the existence of 2 newspapers. The Tornado News would continue with its support the team sports reporting and toothless jokes and riddles columns, and the Student Voice would be the anti-Nixon paper. I was free to stay with the Tornado News, which kept postponing the publication of a jokes column I'd submitted in which I said the only funny jokes were deliberately offensive ones, or to join the Student Voice. I joined it. The Student Voice wouldn't publish me either. I remember one day getting an envelope at the beginning of math class, slipped to the teacher by a fellow staffer, and that when I opened the envelope after the teacher plopped it on my desk, my article came out torn into hundreds of pieces. My article was a narration by someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and it took endless detours. It was meant to be the attempt of someone with OCD to describe OCD who couldn't get to the point because of OCD. The anti-Nixon paper had no use for my angst-ridden prose poem. I stuck with the Student Voice because they said they'd find room in an upcoming issue for the snarky jokes column the conformist Tornado News had kept kicking to the curb. A couple of times, an openly gay 9th grader stopped in at the Student Voice staff meetings to drop off movie reviews. He had no time to stay, and he'd open the door a little and say softly that he had his review. He'd chat very briefly and leave. This was always followed by the editor making jokes about post-nasal drip, which the other older boys laughed at and which, though I didn't get them, I knew had to do with the movie reviewer's orientation. The Tornado News, many of the Student Voice staff meetings were devoted to the cheerleader mentality of the Tornado News. Some of the Tornado News writers were in student government, and I had fear and loathing of them. But the editors of the Student Voice had only the loathing and no fear at all. I'd kept old issues of both papers. All I can say is the Tornado News was Fox and the Student Voice was the New York Times. The kids were echoing to the letter what their parents said at the breakfast table. The Student Voice and the Tornado News were perfect reflections of upper-middle-class opinion, liberal and conservative. But of course, Mr. O'Sullivan, probably the best citizen at the school, had come up with a disastrous solution. Had he insisted the school paper be one paper, the notion of cooperation between political factions might have been hammered into the souls of these warring, privileged groups. Of course, it wouldn't have been fun, and that it was. I remember when the Student Voice was about to die a natural, if early, death, and I went nosing around the Tornado News office, the empty science lab after school, to see if they'd have me back. A decision was not made, and one of the editors, walking with me out of the building, parted with, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." We are a nation with 2 baskets, the reactionary press and the defensive press, Fox and the New York Post versus CNN and the Washington Post. The country these hostile media camps occupy is suffering from national OCD and can't help falling into its dead-end routines. I still will choose a side. I am with the Student Voice. The editor-in-chief did one funny thing. He would champion, once in a while, the writing of a friend of his, not someone he was going to publish. It was a pseudonymous person called Dwight M. Bluenose. The editor would say during a lull, "Oh, I almost forgot. I have a submission from Dwight M. Bluenose." The other older kids would laugh in anticipation, and he would open an envelope with something which was not torn up into 100 pieces. "Dwight M. Bluenose has written, 'Look behind you, there's a commie.'" And he'd read something worthy of the National Lampoon. I genuinely do not think it was his own writing. I sense he had a brother whose humor he appreciated. Perhaps his father wrote them. If it was himself, I forgive him for ripping up my confession of OCD. I'm not sure I'll ever get over both papers forever suppressing my jokes and riddles column, though.